welcome to the third and final keynote address for our Climate Change and Aging Conference. I'm Heather Stewart. I'm the program chair for this event. I think I've probably met most of you before. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Gary Hack. Gary is a human ecologist and senior research associate at the Stockholm Environment Institute. And you probably all know a lot about Gary at this point in time and have had a chance to meet and talk with him personally over the last 2 days. So Gary's a senior research associate at the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York, UK. Gary has worked on a wide range of interdisciplinary environmental projects in transport, climate change, and air pollution at the local and international level. He has a particular interest in human behavior and the environment. Gary has led a number of climate change communication and social marketing initiatives to achieve community behavioral change. He was one of the first academics in the UK, and probably in the world, to examine the issue of an aging population and climate change, and has produced a number of reports on the subject. He regularly writes for the UK press and has appeared on BBC radio and TV news and discussion programs. His new book, Environmentalism Since 1945, will be published in September 2011 by Routledge. So Gary, it's a real treat and honor to have you here with us. I said this before on Tuesday that I consider you a pioneer in this field of research and knowledge. So welcome. You can come take the stage. Don't trip.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the organisers of this conference. I held a similar workshop back in 2008 on older people and climate change, and then I realised that people were not really making the connection between an ageing population and a changing climate. So it's really great that a few years later we've been able to have this conference here in Vancouver and to have an international conference. And I don't know about you, but over the last few days I've learned quite a lot from all the different disciplines, and I think it's really exciting. And hopefully from this conference there'll be more research. We can work together to address this issue of older people and climate change and growing old in a changing climate. The presentation of today is Age of Climate Change, and it's looking at the opportunities and risks of climate change for an ageing population. What I would like to do in some ways is to summarise probably what you've all been exposed to over the last few days. And I want to start first of all by presenting to you this I call my 3C model, which looks at older people and climate change. And this looks at older people as a contributor to the problem of climate change, a casualty, and a champion. And I think over the last few days we've heard quite a lot about older people being a vulnerable group, and we've heard a bit about the opportunities that older people can have, or there are, for older people to become champions. But I think we haven't really learnt a lot or heard a lot about the contribution older people make to the actual problem of climate change. So that's the model for my presentation today. And within that context, we have to think about how older people in terms of climate change mitigation, as well as older people in terms of climate change adaptation. So the structure of my presentation, first I want to look at the challenges. I want to look at age, generally our perception of age, and look at older people as a contributor, casualty, champion of climate change and the co-benefits, and try and come to some conclusion. Well, I think we all know by now, because it's the last day, what the challenge is. We have, at the global level, we had a very good presentation from Carlos yesterday who summarised the issue of an ageing population at the global level, that the number of older persons is expected to exceed the number of children for the first time by 2050. So we have an ageing population. And this is just some stats. I think the main thing I want you to take from this is to look where the ageing population is on a global level. And you can see it here for the population over 60 by region, Asia. Oops, sorry. And over 80 again by Asia. Now, what I find interesting, coming back to the consumption part, the contribution older people make to climate change that we haven't really discussed, is that we do have an increasing global middle class. And this just shows you, this is work from the OECD, with the percentages of the share of the global middle class and the spending. So this is the share in percentage, and this is the spending. And again, the main thing I want you to take from here is that in Asia, we have a high proportion of the global middle class is increasing, and also the spending. And I think this is an area where probably more research needs to be done. So in my theory, I think if we have an Asian population, if we have a increasing global middle class in a specific region of the world, then if they're becoming wealthier, then they're spending their money, they're consuming products, and that product has a carbon impact. So I just want to bring this part in, that on a global level, yes, we have an aging population, but we also have a population who, for the first time, are aspiring to Western lifestyles of high consumption, high carbon. And unless something changes, maybe that will have an impact on climate change in terms of contribution. There's lots of questions you can examine within that, but I think that's a whole research project in itself. Again, so we aging population, are, an increasing global middle class and high consumption lifestyles and patterns, then also a changing climate. And we've heard all the details about climate change over the last few days, and this is just some of the results from the IPCC fourth report, that there'll be a probable increase in temperatures of 1 to 4 degrees, sea level rise, more intense and longer droughts, Arctic ice shrinking, increased frequency of extreme weather events, and that most of the world's scientists now believe that climate change is 90% certain. It's down to human activity. So they're the challenges: an aging population, a changing climate, the rise in global middle class, and high levels of consumption. So first of all, I want now for us to think about what actually age means, because we know that our grandparents, when we age, if we're already aging now, but when we age, when I get to 70, my lifestyle, my perception of that part of my life will be totally different from my father's or my grandfather's. So we know that aging is changing. People are becoming much more active, they're living longer, and that we cannot just look at older people as an homogenous group. We've heard it mentioned several times, a diverse group. People are wealthy, active, other older people are frail and are dealing with health problems. So aging in the 21st century is changing, and it's going to be very different from the past. But then I also want to look at the age, the chronological age. I don't think the age of a person, the chronological age, is a good indication of how they're going to cope in the future, whether it will be with other threats in later life or whether it be threats from climate change. So I think we need an objective measure that defines individuals in terms of their actual ability to cope, rather than just their age based on how long they've lived. So I don't know if any of you come across this idea of functional age. Functional age is the combination of your chronological age, your biological age, how fit you are, your psychological age, and I guess that's your mental state and how you're able to cope with certain particular activities and stresses, and your social age, how well you're integrated in the community with your friends. So your functional age. So next time someone asks you how old you are, you can ask, which age are you referring to? So I know, for example, my colleague, he's 70. I think his biological age is quite fit, and I think his functional age is much lower than his chronological age. So that's what I want to get over, is that age now is just a number. We have to think differently about aging. We have to think differently about people's age and whether they're able their functional age is a better description of how they will cope with certain threats in later life, whether it be climate change threats or threats to their way of life. So going back to my model, first I want to look at older people as a contributor to climate change. Now, we can divide people over 50 into 3 groups, and that's what I tried to do. And the first part, which I call the baby boomers, for the age 50 to 60, they're the first generation of the consumer society. They have earned the highest in their years. They have different attitudes to aging than their forefathers. A high number of them want to work beyond the state pension age. The next are the seniors, 65 to 74. They grew up in an age of austerity. The majority have a low income or tend to be debt averse and prompt bill payers. They dislike waste and they've experienced bereavement and retirement. And then we have what we call the elders, 75 plus. They have similar characteristics to the seniors, but they've lived through great hardship during the war, coping with increased care needs and declining health. They have a high demand for warmth, and they have a reduction in their physical mobility. Now, these kind of characteristics are based on a UK population. I'm sure they translate into North America as well. So I divided the population, over 50 population, into these 3 categories. And I did that to work out their contribution to carbon emissions and their carbon footprint. So you probably all know what a carbon footprint is, but I will define it. The carbon footprint is the total amount of carbon emissions which result directly and indirectly from lifestyle choices of an individual. And this part, indirectly, is very important, because if anyone's seen the calculations of a carbon footprint, they vary quite a lot. For example, in the UK, the average UK citizen has a direct carbon footprint of 6 tonnes, but when you take into consideration indirect emissions, then it goes up to 12 tonnes, so it's double. And it's in these areas of energy, travel, waste and consumables. So just to explain indirect emissions, when we buy our DVD that's made in Canada, that DVD has a carbon impact. And in having a carbon footprint which looks at direct and indirect emissions, it provides a truer picture of the carbon impact of your consumption. So here with the car, your direct emissions is actually using the car, or there's direct emissions from the production of the car, but how they get that car to you to buy in the shop has also emissions. So it's the importation part is allocated to you. So when you actually talk to people about climate change, I've come across lots of people who say, well, why do you want me to change my lifestyle when China are producing all these emissions and building these coal-fired power stations? You need to go and tell them to change their ways. Then I have to remind them that all the cheap products that you buy in the local £1 shop are all produced in China, and it's our consumption. So all we've done in the UK, and obviously it's happened in other countries, we've exported our manufacturing base and our pollution elsewhere, but we are consuming the products. So when we calculated the carbon footprint by age, we did it on household expenditure. And we looked at what people spent their money on according to their age and what was the carbon impact of that consumption of the products that they consumed. And we found out that the baby boomers had one of the highest carbon footprints, and also probably the seniors as well, compared to the rest of the population. Now, this is we did this in 2007. We updated it in 2010 with more up-to-date data, and we improved the methodology. And the whole carbon footprint world and developing methodologies is improving all the time. This is based on CO2 emissions. Now we're looking at not just CO2 emissions, but CO2e emissions, and that is greenhouse gas emissions, so an even more accurate picture of all greenhouse gases from your consumption, not just CO2. So if we look at a bit in a bit more detail, we can see for travel, it's again the baby boomers with their high consuming lifestyles, cosmopolitan lifestyles, have a high proportion of their carbon footprint is travel. But as we get older, we travel. This is compared to the average UK carbon footprint. So the baby boomers is higher than the UK average, while the elders have a lower carbon footprint when it comes to travel, which reflects that when you get older, you're less mobile, you're more likely to stay at home. The other interesting part is energy. Again, as you can see, the elders, they have a high energy impact because they're staying at home, they need warmth to survive. Consumption of particular items, baby boomers is quite high compared to the average, and then the elders consume very less in terms of buying products. Food and drink, this is like eating out, again the baby boomers. So this gives you an indication of age-related carbon emissions and the contribution older people make to the issue of climate change. And when we did this, we received so much criticism that because the level of detail, it doesn't take individual circumstances, and it also was taken up by the media. They loved it, and we had some of these headlines. Over 50s warm to the jet-set lifestyle. Middle-aged in dark on climate change issues. Flying over 50s, baby boomers get the blame. The double standards of the would-be green greys. Well-travelled over 50s have the highest carbon footprint. Baby boomers leave biggest carbon footprint. Over 50s carbon wrap. And over 50s are the biggest polluters. So it just shows you that from evidence how they, and even now, they've done it recently, they can twist what you actually do. Now, when I did this, I did like 30 radio interviews in one day. I got hate mail. Why do I hate older people? And I suddenly was like thrown into this world of like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I'm just a researcher. So once you put your head above the parapet and you say something, you just get shot down. But luckily, this was in about 2007. I think today, since ClimateGate and the rise of climate skepticism, I think I would have got an even harder time. So that gives you an indication of the carbon footprint, the contribution this age group makes to climate change. And as I say, it's an emerging methodology. I think it's improving all the time. I don't believe what we did is perfect. It's just giving you an indication of travel. And I think when it comes from just the people I know in those categories, I think it resonates that those people who are older tend to be less mobile, stay at home, require more warmth, while people who are just coming up to retirement can travel a lot, have a good pension scheme, and therefore have a higher footprint in that area. So, over the last few days, we've heard a lot about the casualty, the vulnerability of older people. When we talk about vulnerability, it's a combination of different factors: exposure, sensitivity, and coping capacity. And it's the interaction between these things that determine why one person who may be 66 is vulnerable to a specific climate-related threat compared to another person. Why are two people the same age, one person is affected and another one isn't? Exposure comes in heat waves, floods, storms, and drought. And we know that climate change, temperature changes, extreme weather events, rainfall. And what I wanted to do here is to think more about just direct emissions, because there's lots of different impacts or direct impacts. So the direct impacts are all these, which we've heard lots about. But the indirect impacts are homelessness, disruption of essential services, and after going to the symposium earlier, I've learnt about the effect it could have on health and assisted technology. So I've learnt something this afternoon, and that's in terms of how people get around in mobility scooters and whether they need actual health equipment at home. So that will affect that. Financial loss, anxiety, and health effects. So direct and indirect impacts, and then that's compounded when you think about pre-existing health and social conditions. So once an individual is exposed to these impacts, climate-related impacts, it's on top of what they're already dealing with in terms of the threats or the issues that they're facing in later life. So what determines an individual sensitivity? And again, we've heard lots about these over the last few days. It's about when they reach later life, their state of health, whether they can access certain types of information, health information, information of services, the quality of the public services, their social support system, their family, their friends, their community, where they live, and their income. So a threat to an individual's way of life could be defined as anything that affects a good quality of life. And so it could affect their neighborhood, their social networks of community, their material conditions, or their health and well-being. So in later life, we're already dealing with a number of things. There's a high probability of threats that come with later life, which is bereavement, a loss of social network. You lose you retire. You're not connected to friends that you would have made at work, and so you may lose connection. Your social network reduces. You're on a pension, so you reduce your income. The environmental conditions where you are in your local community could change. Your health changes, and you have a decline in physical strength. So these are threats related to aging, but then you have to impose on that threats that come with climate change. So you have your normal aging threats in later life, your exposure to climate change, and again, it has an impact which will then determine whether a person is why one person is more vulnerable and another is less vulnerable will be due to their level of sensitivity and from the factors that I just discussed. And then the other thing is their coping capacity. How do people cope when they're exposed and they're sensitive to a particular climate-related threat? Again, we said it's individual capacities, wealth, health, education, your social networks. If you have family that you're able to draw upon to support you, and this could be a very simple thing. It could be like it's snowing. It could be a storm. It could be a snowstorm or high snowfall. Maybe you're dependent on people to come. You can't go out. You need people to come go shopping for you. If you don't have a family, then you've got no one to do that. If you don't have any friends to contact you to say how you are, maybe you don't know you have poor health and you need medication, and then maybe the social services and the protection is not there to actually support you during this time. So it's coping capacity as well. So your sensitivity, your exposure to the conditions, your coping capacity, this all determines whether a person is going to be vulnerable to a climate-related threat. So the third part of the triangle is champion, and how we can use older people as champions. They have enormous knowledge. Some of them have time when they retire to actually get involved and help tackle the issue of climate change. So again, we've heard lots over the last few days about agents for change in terms of both mitigation and adaptation. So this could include, for example, peer-to-peer awareness raising. So in terms of mitigation, that could be about how you save energy in the home, how you reduce your carbon footprint. In terms of adaptation, that could be all the issues we talked about heat wave, about explaining to people what to do when there's an increase in temperature. You could have agents for change in terms of mentoring individuals and teams. And again, that's, from my perspective, I've used the kind of mentoring for encouraging pro-environmental behavioural change, greener lifestyles. They could be champions for specific issues. They could help intergenerational knowledge exchange. And another aspect which we haven't really discussed at this conference is being monitors of local environmental change. In the UK, we have lots of surveys about birds or weather, and it's done by the radio, and people get involved. So this is another aspect, that how we can use this demographic group to actually monitor environmental change in their local environment, and how they can contribute to saying how their environment's changed over time. And here are a few examples, and I'm sure you've got lots more, as the kind of champion schemes. We heard this afternoon all about Suzuki elders. In Australia, they've got a Green Sages program. In Europe, we have this one called the Green Seniors, but they're more of a kind of involved in the Green Party. There's another, I think it's more web-based, called Green Seniors in the US and in the UK. There's another one, I think, again, it's more web-based. I don't know how active they are on the ground, and that's called Green Granny. So we're already seeing a whole kind of networks, champion networks, where older people are getting involved to tackle the issue of climate change. So I think when we talk about older people, climate change, growing older in a changing climate, and how we can actually promote that to raise awareness to decision makers, to whether that be at the local level, the regional level, the international level, I think we need to discuss the co-benefits, because there's so many potential co-benefits. But it's also about how we can reduce the vulnerability of older people reaching later life, and how we can increase their resilience to climate-related threats. So as I said earlier, if we're thinking about how, say, someone my age, when they reach 70 or 80, who wants to be much more resilient to anything that threatens me in later life, whether it be the environment, it be an environmental threat or more of a social threat, we need to think about how we can get people to later life in terms of knowing the information, having access to the information, ensure that they're active and healthy in later life, that they have a good income, that there's good services that support older people in later life, and the social support as well. So it's all the issues that we've discussed. So it's about a better life in later life, and how can we set the framework now to ensure that those people who will in probably 20, 30 years reach their 60s or 70s, that their life is much better, and that they're more resilient to climate-related threats. Another thing that I've heard over the last 2 days is the idea of community. We've heard about age-friendly cities. We've heard about smart cities, livable cities, and here's just a few. Age-friendly, resilient communities, green communities, healthy communities, low-carbon communities, livable communities, sustainable communities. And I just think, wow, I didn't really understand age-friendly. I'd never heard of age-friendly. But then when I realised what I've been writing about is all the same. All the issues are the same. And I'm just wondering how we can present one label that encompasses all these different factors, because I'm sure there's so many overlaps. So I think of a community, I think to put, and this is what I said this morning, I think whether we focus on age solely, or whether we focus on green, or whether we focus purely on health or on low carbon, by doing that, I think we alienate certain parts of the population. So if you talk about green, I know by knocking on doors that some people are not interested. If you talk about age, maybe younger generation are not interested. If you talk about low carbon, again, some people are not interested or livable. So how can we create a community that is appealing to the whole population, and what message and how we package and communicate that? And I think what I've come in my thinking is about quality of life. Now, Carlos, yesterday you put health at the centre, but I would say quality of life. Health is obviously part of quality of life. And I said this morning, that if you ask people what they want, do they want to reduce their carbon footprint? No. Do they want to, save the environment? I think they want to have a good quality of life. So that is the ask, that is the proposition that you can offer people. And in the next project that I'm doing, I'm trying to look at how we can engage a community which engage them on an environmental issue, but by proposing to them a quality of life. And what I'm trying to do in this project is, the project is based on reducing energy. Now, I could go and knock on doors and say, would you like to reduce your energy? Would you like to save money and save the environment at the same time? But I know that some people will not be interested. So what I'm trying to do is think about, it's called the Good Life Project. How I can offer a different message, how I can get certain people into the project and then expose them later to the environmental message. So, for example, in the Good Life Project, we're trying to develop, we can talk about food. So some people might be interested in local food, while we talk about community. The village where I'm doing this project is very well designed. It was actually developed as a pioneering village by a chocolatier and philanthropist, Joseph Rowntree. He established this village, so the housing is very green. He wanted poor people or workers to live in a mixed community with their managers, and he provided green space and a fruit tree for everybody. So in terms of the infrastructure, we're starting from a very high level. It's very green. In terms of the housing, we're working with the housing trust who want to insulate the homes. So we've got the infrastructure. And what I found when I went to this village is that and they also have a big older people residential area there, a kind of complex. And what I found was the infrastructure is great, but the community is divided. And on paper, you would think that's fantastic, but it's a divided community. And so when we're talking about improving our infrastructure, making our transport systems better, our homes better, our communities better, but the communities are people. So it's about how we can engage the people. And they felt that this small village of about 1,800 people was divided. They was divided in terms of wealthy, rich people who were able to afford to stay in the residential home, to poor people who couldn't, people who have been in the village since, or their forefathers have been in the village since the 1900s, and then newcomers to the village. So on paper, it looks great. So my challenge in that project is how I can engage those people to come together to think about energy use, but also to able to create a level of community cohesion. And I think community cohesion is part, I think it helps the community and makes the community much more resilient. So I just want you to think about that, because this is just an idea that I'm having. I'm trying to implement it in practice. It's very challenging, but to try and take a much more holistic approach rather than focus purely on carbon. Because I think what I've learned from my other projects is that when it comes to carbon footprints, for example, people ask me, I advise people to recycle, but from a carbon footprint point of view, when you want to reduce your carbon footprint, it does not register on your carbon footprint, because it's down to your consumption, not what the waste that you produce. But I cannot tell people, don't recycle because it won't help your carbon footprint. So then I realized that it's got to be more than just carbon. So I think we've gone away, especially since 1992 and the Earth Summit and this whole thing about local Agenda 21 and having sustainable communities. We seem to have become fixated on purely carbon. And carbon is really important, we know that. But how can we somehow move one step back and think about the broader quality of life and the other challenges that we have, which is obviously energy insecurity, food insecurity, as well as climate change. So if we want to have a resilient, low-carbon, socially cohesive communities and all the other adjectives that we can use, as I said, the sectors, there are a number of co-benefits. If you're in the transport sector, you want an efficient, safe, reliable transport. You want more people to use public transport, low emissions. If you're able to do that and connect the city, then that is great for air quality, CO2 emissions, and it hopefully provides greater mobility for older people. Housing, energy-efficient housing, age-proofing housing, again, you're reducing your domestic home energy use. That's great for the environment, but great for the people living there in terms of fuel poverty and insulation. Land use, compact design, and age-friendly community and accessibility. So it's all the things that we know, but we've heard in different kind of labels. And all I say, that's great, but I think the biggest thing is community, because we can have the infrastructure. We could live in the most perfect, low-carbon, energy-efficient, solar-panelled house, but if we don't turn off the lights, or it's the behavioural part that is the challenge, is how people change their behaviour. So it's combining the infrastructure with this kind of behaviour community aspect, which I think will allow us to get to here. So conclusions. Up to now, I think the issue of older people and climate change has been the elephant in the room. As I said, back in 2007, I stumbled on older people. I'm an environmentalist. I've never ever thought about older people. And I suddenly had the opportunity to do this project to communicate climate change. So I went to my local newspaper and local radio station and said, oh, can I work with you to do a communication project? And I said, well, who's your target audience? And they said, well, most of them are over 50s. Okay, I'll do that. I'll put that in the proposal. But then I did some research and found that in the UK, I can't remember the exact figure, but a high proportion of the over 50s hold the UK wealth. And I think, well, if they hold wealth, they're consuming. If they're consuming, it's going to have some kind of carbon impact. And that led me along that line to engage with older people, talk about attitudes to climate change, hold focus groups, hold meetings to raise an awareness. And from that, when I was doing it in 2007, I suddenly realized, well, if we have an aging population, surely they're going to be vulnerable to climate change. Why is nobody talking about climate change? And then I held in 2008 the workshop, Growing Old in a Changing Climate. It was very difficult to get people to come to that because it was something not on their agenda. Many of the kind of older people organisations were interested in social care, fuel poverty, pensions. They didn't really understand climate change. But we tried to raise awareness of that. And what's really exciting now that a few years on, we're here today in this conference, bringing an international audience together, and we're hearing, other activities that are going on. So I felt a bit alone talking about older people and climate change. So now I feel like I've got lots of friends. So older friends. So I think I believe this step here today is a watershed. I think now I feel climate change and older people as an issue is going up. And as we've seen, there's so many opportunities for interdisciplinary research, and there's so much that we need to know. So in terms of going back to my triangle, what we need to do is reduce the contribution older people make to climate change, protect them from the impacts of climate change, and mobilize them to become champions in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation. And I feel that we still have some work to do in terms of raising the profile. When I did my report in 2008, I sent it to every minister in the government. We had a big spread in the local regional newspaper. In 2009, another organisation did another report on older people, Greener and Wiser, where they did an older people manifesto. That produced a BBC radio programme on it where they interviewed both of us. So it's on older people. So that's something you can listen to online. It's really interesting. So slowly, the issue is rising. But in terms of raising the profile, I think we need to demonstrate the socio-economic environmental co-benefits of producing age-friendly solutions. And we've seen that here the last 2 days, that it's co-benefits. It's the co-benefits that I think is the way forward. We need to understand the unique geographical and socio-economic context. Now, we've heard lots about hurricanes and tornadoes. I feel so informed about emergency relief. But in the UK, we don't have many hurricanes and tornadoes. So there it's flooding. And so, what I'm saying is, on a global scale, Africa, North America, Europe, Latin America, they will have different issues. And I think we need to understand the context. Again, more action-orientated interdisciplinary research to engage older people into the wider community. We've heard that. Raise awareness of the issue at the local, regional and international level. And I do believe this is important because when you come as researchers, if we want to do research, we need to do it under a particular program. And those programs are put together based on priorities. And if people are not really talking about climate change and an aging population, then it's not going to be included in research programs, then there's not going to be funding available for us to do the work that we need to do. So coming from an organisation that is very much to policy, I believe that this raising awareness on an international level as well as local, regional and national is really important to get this issue on the political agenda, so then funding will be available. And one way to do that, I think, is to develop the evidence base to demonstrate to the issues to policymakers. And finally, something which may come out of this conference is to develop an international network of older people and climate change. And I put here climate change / environment, because I say that I think climate change is important, but I'm just wondering whether and it's very sexy, but environment in a more holistic way is a possibility of going forward. So that's my ramblings, and be really interesting to hear what you've got to say. And finally, I just want to leave you with a quote. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. So we've all come here these last 2 days, and I think now we have to go out and promote this issue and tell people that it is a major issue that needs investment, and we've got to do something about it. Thank you.
I think I was right. That was the ideal way to start winding down this conference. So we'll take some questions now from the audience. Carlos?
My name is Carlos, and I'm a baby boomer. I have a question and some comments. Mm-hmm. First of all, I was very interested in the research that you did. When I met you, I said I've seen you or heard of you before, and in fact now I realize that I've read that that report before this event, but I hadn't made the connection with you, so sorry about that. But what I found interesting when I read it was that I didn't expect those results. And so I was wondering whether in your research in other places, or whether you know of research in other places where they have looked, say, for example, Asia or Latin America, because I'm pretty sure the profile of carbon footprint by age would be very, very different. Yeah. I'm suspecting that. And so that would be just a question for you to comment later. But I wanted to say something else. The issue of you put quality of life there. And I wonder whether, in the same sort of way that you did your research, when you ask people what is quality of life for you, whether do we have an agreement on what quality of life? I'm sure we don't even have an agreement on what health is, but I believe we're closer when you think about health. And my concern is that a lot of people, at least the Western society, they associate quality of life with income. Your pension is higher, or you have some sort of income that raises your quality of life. And in other places, the views may be very, very different. When I spoke yesterday, I spoke about Pachamama. What I didn't speak about was another South American and Andean country's vision, which is what is called the Summa Causae, which is an indigenous vision of sustainable development. Because the whole idea, it's roughly translated to living well, el buen vivir in español. And it's Ecuador, for example. I know we have someone from Ecuador. They have put it in the constitution. And what it means is really that you take from nature what you need and not more. And if you manage to have that balance, it means that you have achieved a high standard of living, quality of life, or human well-being. So I think those are interesting concepts to be exploring, because it's a very different way of seeing the world. And I think that we all aspire at good quality of life. And unfortunately, probably nearly everyone thinks of it as income. And the other thing that I want to say is that it's lucky that the press is not picking up on the carbon footprint of researchers. And the more successful we are as researchers,
absolutely,
the higher carbon footprint. I don't want anyone to be calculating my carbon footprint. My job means that I need to travel a lot.
But your carbon footprint from your work travel is allocated to your organization's carbon footprint, not your personal choice to go on holiday.
Well,
so don't worry. Okay. That's how I.
You really helped me there. Thanks.
So thank you, Carlos. I think you're right about quality of life, because in this project, or Good Life, what's challenging us now is that people's perception of a good life is very different, especially based on consumption. So you may ask someone, well, would you like to take part in a project called the Good Life Project? What do you think about the good life? What would be a good life for you? Oh, going on holiday to Thailand and buying a 4x4. And we've come across that, and that's why, and I don't know how to resolve that, and that's why we are developing this concept at this moment in time, and we're working with a sustainability communications company, a famous one in the UK, to develop the model. So I hopefully, maybe next time I see you, I will have the answer. But I understand the challenge that quality of life is different to different people. And maybe it's a terminology in the words, maybe living better, it might be another one. So I may change the name of the project. But at the moment, that's like the working title. But I've come to the challenge of the different interpretations. Going back to the carbon footprint, I haven't seen age-related carbon footprint, and it'd be really good if somebody did it internationally, or we can get money to do it. And I am absolutely sure you're right that this is why we say the geographical and socio-economic context is important if we wanted to apply the 3C model in Latin America or in Africa, it'll be very different, the outcomes that we have. And that's why what's good is that what I'm telling you, because I'm just making suggestions, and nobody can say it's wrong because we don't know. So these are ideas that I'm putting out there, and it's something that I think we can develop together to see how it works. But I think the geographical and socio-economic context is really important, and that's what I want to learn more about and how it differs internationally.
I would like to make a comment. Then all what I have heard over the last 2 days is coming from very Western perspective.
Yes.
And I really appreciate what Carlos said, because we have to start look at something which goes beyond consumerism. We need a shift in perception. And I think we are doing total disservice to the community at large at the global level if we keep focusing only on what we Westerners kind of are seeing as a good life. Because there's a lot of research, then people do not associate their happiness with their financial situation. And actually, I'm very much involved with that, starting to think as a happiness as being the index instead of the one which we use at the moment. And there is approach to it which could be developed based on native traditions in some way, but also very broad range of other traditions, which means treating the universe as a living being, which is the mother God kind of a perception, goddess perception. Because if we treat universe as being a living being, we will treat each other better, and all sentient beings will be treated with respect. We wouldn't have to go to grab as much as possible for each of us. And I would strongly recommend the book by Dr. Duane Elgin, Living Universe, because it really will help developing broader perspective. I'm involved with the group running Vancouver group of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which has a base in Petaluma in California. This is a group of scientists which are looking at interfacing of quantum physics and research on consciousness. And I think this will really build a value base behind all this kind of a research. And I'm not a researcher in gerontology, I do other things, but this will be kind of my input into the conference.
Okay. I would just like to comment on that. So I agree absolutely that and I should have said it at the beginning, I come here from a Western perspective, and obviously some of the issues that we've discussed in a developing country perspective is totally different. And I'm hoping, and this is where my research I want to go, is to now, I've looked at the Western world, to go into looking at the impact internationally in developing countries. So I think more work needs to be done to understand, if we take the model, the triangle, how that would affect, say, Africans. Going back to the other thing about quality of life, and yes, in the UK we have we've talked about happiness and the quality of life and well-being index, and then the Prime Minister wants to record that. And within this project, there's been methodologies that are developed by the New Economic Foundation on how to measure happiness and well-being. A government agency is looking into how you can measure that at a national level. So I am looking into those aspects of what kind of questions I could ask people if I were looking in a community. With what you're suggesting about like the universe as a living being, like Gaia. Now, I agree with you, but I just think straight away that I'm going on knocking on the door and saying, hello, I'm from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Would you like to get involved in a project about the Earth being a living being? And I know the skepticism, and that's the thing. There's environmental skepticism more so now than, say, a couple of years ago. And that's why I think it's important communication, how we package the messages to the population, because we know that certain people do not care about environmental issues and other people care about other issues. It's how we package it. So, yeah, I'll look into it. But
people care about being happy.
Yeah.
And it's part of even U.S. Constitution, so you can go into it.
Yeah.
And Denmark actually is now in the process of creating the Danish government based on Bhutan, Kingdom of Bhutan, perception of how important is happiness as a national goal.
Yeah, and the UK is looking into it as well, but there's lots of scepticism about why you're asking us if we're happy at a time when we're cutting back on government spending and on health.
Happiness is choice.
Yeah, but no, I'm aware of that, and I will look into it. Thank you.
Yeah, there is some literature that does suggest that it is an inverted U-shaped function and that carbon consumption does go down as people get older. Mm-hmm. So I'll send you that reference. Mm-hmm. What I also want to send you the reference on is the guru in the area of environment and aging literature was a fellow by the name of Powell Lawton, and he has a model in which he talks specifically about the good life. So I will send you that reference as well.
Hmm.
Maybe one more comment or question. And brief, if we can.
Just a comment. We met last week, and one of the strategic planning assumptions is that values drive behaviors. And it was pointed out that actually sometimes it can be the reverse, and that you incentivize people to use mass transit, for instance, and they suddenly find that that's quite a good experience, and that the behavior of using public transit has actually they've come to that point from a different direction.
Yeah, I think when you spoke the other day, it's about the issue of the rebound effect. So you could go in a home and put energy-efficient light bulbs in, and then someone said, well, I can leave my lights on because it's an energy-efficient one. Or they could save money on their energy bills, but then thought, oh, now I've got this extra money, I'll go on holiday to Mallorca for my summer holiday. So it's the rebound effect, where they what other kind of behaviours it may encourage, which are not necessarily part of the remit that you want them to follow.
We need to move on. I think we're to start at 4 o'clock with the next session. So unless you don't mind taking Cassandra's question quickly, and I'll change the technical device here.
Okay, thanks, Gary. That was really interesting. I've been curious throughout your presentation of how you might square a circle in a sense. I'm really familiar, obviously, with the gerontology literature. I don't know if you've come across the work of Chris Gilliard and Paul Higgs on the third age, which is this age group of successful agers, consuming people, and this engagement with the heavily consuming lifestyle is very much a marker of successful aging that we're encouraged to do and we aspire to do. So I'm just not sure how, on the one hand, you kind of encourage an age group to do one thing, and then on the other try and take that away. There's such a a drive to age successfully, to grow older without aging, to stay away from that fourth age, which is your 75 years and older, and consumption is such a key characteristic to that. So I kind of see that this research needs to be situated in a real sort of gerontological context of the third age as well. So you don't have to answer that. It was just
no. I think
a
it's
comment.
and that's like I say. I've come from this subject from an environmental perspective, and the last few days I've been exposed to the gerontological, so I can't say its perspective, and so I've learned lots, and so I think I'll now be able to integrate that now in my future work. So yeah, so if you can send me some references, that'd be great, and like I say, I'm developing my concepts based on what I did at the beginning and what I'm learning in practice at the local level, and just trying to extrapolate learning to see what other people think. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you. Are you okay?